Okay, we'll call to order the January 18, 2018 meeting of the Caribou Planning Board. First item of business, election of officers for 2018.
Yeah, we talked about that.
You want it?
It's not that I want it, I think you want me to take it.
What's your,
I thought we already had this discussion.
yeah, but you said something about next year. You want it right now? Have it right now.
Let's get this straight. It's not a question of want.
Oh. Seriously? You interested?
Make your call.
I get to choose? Oh.
Somebody does.
We just start throwing around nominations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it nominate Bob for chairman? Was that the?
That's what Phil seems to be leaning on.
Yep, yep. I'm all for
He
that.
not want me to move that way.
You need a second to that?
We have a
did
second
down
for
there.
Evan.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And I'll take the vice.
Who said
We have
that?
been
Wait, have you been the vice?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I'm just saying I'd volunteer for that, but I can be your backup.
Oh, I'm so grateful. I guess I'll nominate Phil for vice chair.
Which one though?
Which vice?
No, which Phil?
Oh, that one. You've got a job.
And Mr. McDonough III, are you wanting to keep the secretary position?
Oh, sure. I'm fine with
Okay,
that.
so these are all considered nominations?
Yep.
All in favor of the new slate? All right, unanimous. Except we left Todd out. You want to take over right now? Or you
I
want-
guess.
He doesn't have to switch chairs. We can do that afterwards, right?
Just give him the gavel.
Present me with the gavel.
There we go.
An appropriate ceremony, and I'll be happy.
Ah, now I can relax.
Now, next item. We got set meeting dates and times for 2018. Is there?
It seems to be working pretty well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we
Yep.
changed them for your schedule, which is working well.
Yeah, a lot better.
We're fine.
So even though this one's a week late, normally we're saying it will be the second
Right.
Thursday
Second Thursday.
of each month
Yep. 5:30.
at 5:30.
That's fine.
All in agreement?
Second that.
All right. That's for that. There are minutes of the November 30 meeting which need to be reviewed.
I move the minutes accepted as distributed.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Minutes are approved. Now you may sign them.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the big business at hand tonight is the public hearing. This is the final plan review for the site design application for Eastern Aroostook RSU 39 to construct a new school gate for grades pre-K through 8. And I declare the hearing open at 5:32. Is there anyone here that wishes to speak to the issue before we get into detailed discussions about each site element? Anyone from the public want anything to say? Hearing none, seeing none, the hearing is closed at 5:33. Now we'll get down to it. Do you folks have something new to add, or should we just work our way through this application?
If I could just have couple minutes to say something. I don't think we have anything new to add other than to answer your questions or anybody from the public tonight. But I just thought I would give you an overview of where we're at in the process and in terms of timeline. I want to say, first of all, thank you very much for having this special meeting tonight to do the public hearing portion of the planning board approval. We are on schedule right now. We need planning board approval to go out to bid and to get approvals from the State Department of Education. Right now, our overall schedule, we're in what we call quality assurance, quality control period through June, through the end of this month and into February. February 2nd, we have to go to the Department of Education for the subcommittee approval. And then February 14th, we'll have a final Department of Education approval. Bidding, we're slated to go to bid February 2nd, and we'll bid through the month of March, with bids due on April 3rd. Right now, we are on schedule for that. That would mean we would have a scheduled construction start with a successful contractor and bid period. Construction would start in April. And that would allow us to occupy the new school building in February of 2020. Complete site work in the fall or in August of 2020. We've extended the, we had a preliminary contract or pre-quals open until January 5th. Over the holidays, we've decided to extend the contract or pre-qual period to February 2nd to make sure that as many contractors and as many subcontractors know about the project before we go out to bid. The contractors for general construction need to be pre-qualified. So we're just going to make sure that everybody knows that. We're going to open the door a little bit wider. We've also had a successful interviews for the clerk of the works, and notification of that will be forthcoming. So I think we have all the parts in place. We've submitted to the DEP back in November, and hopefully we'll be hearing from the Department of Environmental Protection shortly. So that's kind of the big picture in terms of the schedule. I don't know how you would like to proceed, since there aren't a lot of members from the public here in terms of the project and the phasing, or we could go just right to questions. I don't.
I think we took care of them last
We
week.
did a lot of
Okay.
questioning and discussing last time,
Okay.
and substantially nothing has changed. So it's my feeling that, pardon me for just checking this for a second, we should probably work our way down through items A through Z. Final site design criteria. And before you get out of here tonight, you are Mr. Stairs, right? No. Mr.
This
Stairs.
is yes. This is Darren Stairs, our civil engineer with Stan Tech, who's with me tonight.
I'm
So
going to need his signature on this original, yeah,
So.
before you get out of here tonight. The preliminary site plan review went well. The board at that time felt that all the criteria for preliminary site review were met. And so, and I'm asking the board on this, we should do a pretty comprehensive or a pretty thorough finding of fact on this. So as we go down through items A through Z, I would appreciate comments in either the positive or the negative, or possibly where we would want to add a condition, so that when we have our staff write it up, that we have a good, solid finding of fact on which to base our approval. Given that, item A is conformance with comprehensive plan.
That's pretty clearly is.
Any further comment? Mr. Hunter thinks it's in conformance. I tend to agree.
It doesn't violate anything in the comprehensive plan. Frankly, there's no mention in the comprehensive plan of the new school that I recall. So it's certainly doesn't violate anything in that plan.
All right. Yes. Traffic,
I-
probably will merit some
I,
discussion.
yeah, I mean, I think they've done a pretty good job at seeing which way the traffic's gonna flow and adding the extra lane to turn into
Mitigation
this.
of Bennett.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
There's
looked
been
at
a
it
lot
and
of, there's a lot of
a lot
work
of
too on
discussion
High
there.
Street that's gonna be done in terms of sidewalks and crossing, safer crossing areas. There's pretty good on-site control of traffic in terms of
Yeah.
civilians versus buses.
And I think the addition of the additional pedestrian walking light down by where the parking lot is, going down towards South Park, I think that's going to be beneficial as well. So,
The turning lane, that's east-west, right? Or is it specifically designed for one? I think we covered this last time, but I wasn't 100% sure,
This is
so.
a continuous, left or right.
Okay, so it's gonna be east or west
Either
direction, right?
direction.
Okay.
Two directions.
Yeah, you're right,
Uh,
east-west.
Then there's a turn lane on, turning left
Left
from
turn
High
lane
Street
on
on
High.
Bennett, we're adding a turn lane.
Correct,
Short
okay.
That
turn
will
lane
be
there.
very nice.
It was just that one little spot right there. I couldn't remember whether it was east-west or whether it was just one directional, so.
I think traffic's a go.
Okay, in line with traffic, or almost in conjunction with traffic, is the issue of site access. We have access from Glen Street for buses and for people who will use the parking lot. We have access from Bennett Drive, and this is vehicular access.
Right.
We have pedestrian access from further up on Bennett and from Glen.
They also have the emergency vehicle access in there too.
What- Yeah, we talked about that last time. Remind me where that is. That's further up on Bennett, isn't it?
There's a path.
Yeah, right. That's a gated, and important people have keys to that, right?
Yeah, and there will be pedestrian access at each end also. It's primarily to be used as for pedestrians to go back and forth. That will just be open, an opening in the gate. An opening in the fence.
kind of like the same thing we have down near the wellness center right now, that opening,
Yeah.
that size opening.
There'll be a vehicle gate that the fire department can.
Yeah.
Any further comments on site access?
I think it's good.
Parking and vehicle circulation. There was some discussion last time about whether people would all go in one way and out the other, or whether Bennett Drive was allowed to be two-way. Any further thoughts on that?
I would think that if, after everything is completed and in place, if, there's nothing that says that whether something is one-way or two-way can't be changed after the fact. If further evaluation warrants that, this one-way now needs to become two-way in order to facilitate these cars to move out. I mean, nothing is cast.
But out of the gate, you guys are looking at having one-way direction coming off of Bennett, exiting out onto Glen, correct?
So you do have a traffic movement permit from the DOT,
Yeah.
which shows this. So if you wanted to modify it, you would just have to go back to the DOT and show it.
Now, is leaving from the bio waste, is that little section able to exit onto Bennett?
Only for service vehicles.
And definition of a service vehicle, school service vehicle? Or when you say?
Delivery truck, that's a little bit of an ambiguous term, but
Yeah.
the idea was, from a DOT standpoint, they would allow parents, staff, whoever to come in this way and then circulate one way through this drop-off loop. They can enter the parking lot and it's two-way, but they would have to go out on Glen. This will be signed service vehicles only, excuse me. So this area back here by the biomass building and the service building is really full.
You're not going to put a gate there or
Oh,
anything?
No, no gate.
I was gonna say
It'll
that,
just be signed.
that connection from the parking lot through, by the service vehicle, I can see, like you said, that,
Well, I can see at the end of the day, with the influx of traffic, let's say for those people who are picking up their children, it's not going to be advantageous for somebody to try to scoot through there because the amount of traffic that's probably going to be flowing in from Bennett Drive into that area is just going to make it almost a nightmare for somebody to try to scoot through.
It's a lot easier to bug out to Glen Street and
Right.
head away.
You're kind of flipping a coin at that point if you're going to get out or anything, you know. I mean,
This was really designed to allow the delivery truck
Yeah.
with the wood chips to maneuver. That's why this is so wide in here. And the DOT, because it's such an infrequent trip, they would allow that exit,
Are you envisioning a tractor trailer?
yes.
And according to Wayne, those deliveries are off hours for the most part,
Oh.
not during regular hours.
and that's delivered on a live bottom or something type tractor trailer truck, or is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure how he gets it,
Yeah, it's,
the walking floor type.
Yeah, a live
Yeah.
bottom, yeah.
Conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Correct.
The only other issue on the parking is I had raised at the last meeting, my recollection was the parking lot wasn't gonna be completed by the time school was opened.
That's correct.
And so the question was, where are they parking in the meantime?
Yeah, this is probably hard for you guys to see up there, but this is kind of a snapshot in the phasing plan. I think we went over the phasing a little bit last time. So this is phase 3, which is the new school will be built. But you can see the middle school still here, obviously elementary school still here. So this parking lot, what we're imagining right now is the contractor will construct this drop-off loop as far as they can, but this is where Park Street is right now, so they'll end there. And we'll circulate, just for that time being, the cars this way until they can tear down the school and finish the parking lot.
Well, the question isn't circulating, it's where,
Where the staff park.
yeah, where are the teachers gonna park and the staff?
Yes, so Alan's got a nice
Okay.
trace here, I'll show you. Here it is.
so, Jane, right? Well, it's time. There's a lot of phases on this project, and it's a construction project, and everything is not gonna be perfect. However, we did do a phase 3 for parking, and Mark had some questions as well. We expect that the pool property would be accessible to the contractor for contractor parking. And that can easily accommodate 50 to 60 vehicles. But that's for their use. For the middle school, you know, this is also not a perfect scenario in that time period, but what we're showing is the use of the side for drop-off and for parking. We sort of verified that we could get some diagonal parking in here accessible for both ways. But the front of the middle school would be used for buses, and this is a parent drop-off loop with parking on the inside. This parking would remain here, and we'd probably lose a few places out back here so that the students have some place to go outside in 2 areas. And in that scenario here, we're thinking that we could get 66 spaces. I know that's not up to the amount that you want to mark. I think you were looking for 72.
75, yeah, 72, 75.
72, 75. But there's more spaces. You have more than enough over here at Teak Park Elementary School. So there may have to be some, some trade-off there.
What time of the year is this? Is this winter or summer?
This will be
This is going to be for both.
1920 school year.
I'm confused. I thought we were talking about the new school is built, we're now demoing the middle school, and while we're demoing the middle school, we don't have that parking. So where are people
Oh,
going
we
to
thought
park?
you were talking about while we're building the new school. Where's the middle school?
Oh,
Oh,
no.
that never bothered.
No, we're talking about,
Oh,
our concern is after the new school is built,
Okay.
the old schools have not been torn down, and where is everybody gonna park since the middle school is still standing? And it is your planned future parking area.
Right.
And my question about what time of year is this, is,
Spring to,
I'm just, I mean, school opens in the fall. But then, no, you're good, they're going in there in March.
We're going, yeah, we're gonna occupy, the new school is gonna be,
February.
yes, correct.
You're gonna occupy in February,
Right.
and there's snowbanks, which consume part of the space. And so, when is the demo on the middle school scheduled to begin, approximately?
Just as soon as,
we get the kids out of there.
just as soon as they move.
March. April.
Would it be,
So you've got a spring semester where you don't know where staff's gonna park.
is there any,
They won't
this
be
time
able
of
to
year.
park here.
That's right.
They have to park either, they have to fill up this parking lot, we have the pool area, which will be freed up, the contractor will mostly be out of this area. We
But-
have,
Won't demolition of the existing teak park be going on then?
not, well, I think we can leave this parking lot in place until this one is, you know, it can be staggered.
Yeah, because the contractor can come in from the backside of the school. There's enough
All right.
acreage there for them to be able to.
Yeah, they can be working on the building proper, have this fenced off, and keep the parking
Yep.
lot as long as we need it. But the only thing left to do here is put the fields in, so this is actually a little bit more urgent, obviously, because we need the parking lot.
So the middle school is slated to be demoed first with Antique Park following.
Just right now.
so,
Not concurrent.
do you have surrounding Teague Park, 72 spaces, as Mark was looking for?
There's got to be almost all of that at Teak Park.
60,
If you have Teague Park and the pool,
there's
Correct.
60, and
And there's, there, you could
put
probably
another
squeeze
40
spots in across at the bus
another
garage as
50 where the
well.
pool was.
Be a little tight, but if need
Okay.
be, push come to shove.
We've actually, and I know this is a bit of a distance, but we've expanded the parking lot up where the park will be. There's 81 spaces here.
And then also there's some added flexibility if it can be worked out with the wellness center, this area right here behind the wellness center. There's
Yep.
what have I had written down there? Yeah, there's another 48 plus spaces that could be accommodated back there if we could get.
Yeah, but nobody's gonna wanna park back there and walk to school in -25, -30-degree weather.
Yeah, but
There's,
that's,
there's ample,
first come, first serve.
but there's also ample transportation that if they need to divert a little bus to pick up the teachers and bring them to school, they could still do that if need be. I mean,
Well, all I
if you're
can,
looking, you know,
Contractor.
all we can do is encourage you to work with the school committee to make sure that you've got a viable plan that they and their staff can live with. Well, you gotta show me where that is, but not now.
You pull out with your right hand.
Last time I did that, I was saying. Okay.
Yeah, you lift it up.
my only other concern with parking is gonna be, once everything else is demoed, you know, the school's up and running, and they start to have, let's say, functions during the day, you know, if they have a concert during the day, you know, where the school's gonna be in session, but you're gonna have an influx of traffic with regards to parents, you know, where's gonna be a feasible spot for parents to park that's not gonna tie up, hinder traffic on Glen Street? Because obviously, they're not gonna be parking on Bennett Drive, but just that. You know, if you were to look at, let's say, when the Hilltop was open and they had the Harvest Hoedown, I mean, there was all kinds of parking spots up there, and the minute you introduce, you know, well, how many grades did Harvest Hoedown? It was pre-K through
pre-K through 2.
pre-K through 2. So
Four.
I mean, there were people parked too deep on the side by the Little League fields. There was, you know, sometimes there was 2 or 3 deep on the side by the fence by the school. So I mean, you had the influx of those kinds of parents for that kind of activity. I just see a potential problem for parking with regards to, you know, having events during the school day?
Well, I guess to answer your question, a worst case scenario, how much parking could you get?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what you're asking.
what would be there, what would be available for parents to come and park during the day for an event at the school?
Are you talking after final completion or during?
After final
After
completion.
final completion.
Oh, after.
So,
Yeah, after final completion.
yeah. So, well, you know, we've got as much parking on here as the Department of Education will allow us to do. With the parent drop-off loop, if you were to use that
Yep.
as well, we've got 42, staff and visitor, we've got 130, and then we got the bus loop as well. The buses won't be there, so that could be used.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of flexibility there, as well as on the other side of the street, if you could do some sharing. I know it's a distance.
Yep. Oh, yeah, and
But, you know, we've got up here in front with the reconfiguration of the T Park, we've got 81 shown out front here, which will be permanent.
Yep.
Plus, there's this area in
That
here,
won't- yeah, that
which is
area
another
there won't-
48 spaces.
That won't be available because they've got plans for that.
But until that
Yeah.
gets built,
Yeah.
right.
you've got another 48
Right.
spaces there, and there's probably a little bit more flexibility
I
back
think-
here as well.
I think looking that far into the future is not going to be very easy for us. We're going to have to trust the school committee to work something out. Okay, so what's consensus on item D? Are we good?
I think we're good.
We're good. We're as good as we're gonna get with that piece of land.
do we want to make a note with regards to parking during
What kind
the
of-
construction phase?
I don't think we know what conditions to impose.
Right.
I think they'll just make it work.
Okay.
It'll work.
Okay, pedestrian circulation, I think we just beat that one to death.
Yeah.
That's a yes.
Site conditions. Any comments on site conditions?
They researched multiple sites before they selected this one, so I presume it's the best one available. So I'd say it's a yes, it's fine.
It's not a steep hill. It's relatively flat.
It's close proximity to the rec center that already exists.
That's the primary driver for that location.
Yeah. There isn't a better location.
No, I agree.
I'll agree to disagree on that one, but that's just my personal opinion.
Open space, I'm not sure is applicable. This is not a residential development.
Well, there's gonna be lots of it with the ball fields.
We got the fields there.
Based on the fields and the recreation, or the new T Park across the street, there certainly is a lot of open space adjacent to the school.
I'd give it a yes.
All right. Sewage and water we can cover together. Those are public utilities. If no one's building a new sewer, no one's drilling new wells, I don't think that's an issue personally. So I think, I'm just suggesting they're both easy yeses.
Yeah.
I agree.
Anyone wish to comment on emergency vehicle access?
Well, I think
That
we've
was
already
covered.
factored.
I think we
it in.
covered that. Waste disposal. That's gonna be done with private contractor, just like it is now. And it's a school department function.
And the dumpsters are relatively close to Glen Street.
Yeah, they're located right down here.
Yeah, that's right.
Loading area.
And there's an access,
Yes,
there's an access for those trucks.
directly right there.
Yeah.
It's on the exit of the bus loop, right?
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
So there is good access for trash trucks. Buffering. We haven't talked a lot about buffering.
Is this project that needs buffering.
Not to my mind.
I mean, you're bordered by streets on both sides.
Streets on both sides.
I think
And
the
Yeah,
only,
fences.
Fencing.
Wow.
I was gonna say, I think you're,
And the natural land drop too on that other side.
yeah, I don't think buffering,
No, that's the, oh, the big
it's
one?
not like you're,
It is right
it's not like you have a metal recycling
Right.
field that you want hidden from the public.
But there's existing trees on private property to the south of the site.
right, the landscape architect is proposing some screening along the biomass building
Okay.
adjacent to these residential properties. That was the only area he thought was more concerned,
There's, if I might also interject, there was some discussion with the building committee that looking at maybe putting some increased height to the fencing along Bennett Drive along the play fields to try to help prevent balls going over into the streets.
Oh, up where the fields are, yes.
So it's-
And netting, also netting.
And then, so as a way of, since buffering that impact into the roads.
That's a good idea.
How high would the fence be? Kind of what's around the ball court down by on Bennett Drive right now, that type of fence?
12 foot probably.
12 foot, yeah. Something like that.
Because the fence running along Bennett right now is what, it's no more than 8.
It's 6 feet.
It's like
I think your buffering is fine.
Yeah, I go with that.
We have consensus on buffering. Natural areas,
Is that applicable?
no, I don't think it is.
You know, if you want a clean record, we ought to stay away from the NAs. You just say
Oh.
that the concerns are
Good point.
minimal and what we have is adequate.
All right, that's a good point, Matt, thank you.
Good. Good advice.
Exterior lighting, we talked about that last time, the plans for that haven't changed.
so,
I think we're good. Stormwater management, there's been if anyone took the time to go through here, there's a lot of design work
Yeah,
on
we discussed
stormwater.
that
We
with,
discussed that last
yeah,
time
we
too.
did discuss that. With the area between the parking lot
light
and the parent
green.
drop-off, correct?
Yeah.
And
That
that's,
was one of the
yeah,
sources
that's also under erosion and sediment
Yep.
control.
So it's a yes.
That's a good design.
Yes on both.
Yes, yes, I'm up to item Q,
Yeah,
buildings.
okay. Buildings.
If these weren't satisfactory, we wouldn't be holding this hearing.
Only question I have, is that footprint showing the second gymnasium that?
Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Okay. It's
Yes.
included. Is that a go, or is that still in the fundraising stage?
No, we voted, the town voted to do that.
Oh, I missed that.
The gymnasium and
And the music room,
Music.
yeah.
And the
That was
music's
on-
added
same
on, music
election.
room's added onto that?
It's all in
It's all
that
part of
footprint.
I said town,
Right,
city.
it's all part of our documents. It's all
Okay.
part of the package.
Okay, okay. Good.
Fully aware that there were some private donations coming in.
Oh, well, yes, I knew that.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's why I asked, was the fundraising sufficient to bring that up?
Ongoing.
It's on, yeah,
It's ongoing. So the building's
I
fine.
suggest a yes on the buildings.
Yep.
Existing landscape, well, a lot of it's gonna get redone.
I was just gonna make a comment that a lot of the plantings have already, a lot of them have been moved by Gary.
Yeah, a lot of those trees are sitting up.
Yeah,
by
and
the garage.
salvaged.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so he's already relocated a lot of those that were dedicated, but we're doing the best we can to save the rest that he targeted. We walked
I
the
just
site.
didn't have the
so-
numbers. Where have they been removed from? The school property or?
They were running parallel to Bennett Drive, right?
Right, some of
And
those
some of them.
were smaller plantings that he was able to move and
yeah,
he's
around
taken.
the pool building, some around the park area.
Did you say Gary? Which Gary?
Gary Markey.
Okay.
We're preserving the row of memorial trees along Bennett Drive. I
Okay,
don't know if that's
that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, we pulled the field grading back away from those, and there's a couple we're trying to save in here that are nice, like red maple, maybe, not sure.
I know, but those two elm trees that mark the the back portion of the property, I think we're trying
These
to.
two?
Yep.
Okay, no,
Yep.
sorry.
No, there's a huge elm right here.
Yep.
There's a huge elm over here on the other side.
By the tennis court?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't see many of those trees around.
Yes, we're trying to
No.
save those as well.
Yeah, not in that condition.
Yeah.
So in trying to save those, have you incorporated a 50-foot no disturbance area or something around those trees?
Yeah, tree protection fence.
But is it a 50-foot? I don't think it's a 50-foot.
30-foot?
Oh, I'm sorry, you said 50 foot.
We asked for the contractor to protect those, and I don't know exactly what we're including.
We can talk to the landscape architect.
Yeah.
Typically, it's the tree canopy plus 10 feet. That's what they need to stay
Okay,
at.
disturbance on the
And if they need to go in there, it's handwork or, and if they need
Yeah,
to,
tree, canopy plus 10 keeps you out of the root structure,
typical, yeah.
usually.
And you don't want to cover the roots. You don't want
Right, you don't really.
You can't
no,
build up the soil around the trunk, it'll kill it for sure.
Right, yeah, so we've tried to keep the grading back out of it.
The 6x6 timbers that are all frost heaved along, are those being yanked out? You know what I'm talking
Yeah, all
about?
those are gonna go.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd necessarily call them frost heaved. I think they were put in at different angles.
Oh, no, they were flat when the National Guard first put them in, until the first winter.
Where are these?
This is on the,
Along Park and then up Glen, right?
no, this is on the border of Glen Street, on that property where it borders Glen Street. There's a number of
Oh, yes, yeah.
6x6 posts that come out of the ground, and there's a cross that ties every two uprights. There's
Oh,
one
yeah.
horizontal.
Sort of
They're
a
kind like
vehicle barrier.
guardrails. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
being removed.
Yeah,
Gary's already salvaged as much of that as he can for other wood projects.
okay, good, yeah. Yeah, they were level when first put in, but after the first winter, that changed. So,
I take it item R is good to go? Infrastructure, I don't think we need to talk too much about that.
I think it's good to go.
Advertising features, I'm not sure how we address that.
Probably have one of those signs like the high school has.
You're gonna have
Is there
signage,
gonna be,
message boards, electronic message boards.
We're proposing a sign out at the front entry. That's a double acting sign that you can see from either way going up on Bennett,
Okay,
okay?
and that will be electronic?
We're not, right now, there's not an electronic bulletin board out there, but it will be we're planning on a sign that's, the letters are illuminated.
Okay.
So it's got power.
Yeah, so it'll have power.
So if the school board wants to change that to a bulletin board later, they can.
Yes, there will
It's
be
out of our
power
purview.
out there.
Yeah. Is there any signage on the Bennett Drive side?
that's where,
That's where it is.
Excuse me, Glen Street side, wrong street, Glen Street.
There is some signage out there, but not a main sign for the main entry.
Probably just traffic guidance,
Traffic.
buses only here.
so nothing advertising on Glen Street. It's,
Correct.
anything advertising per se would be on the Bennett Drive side.
I think that's appropriate.
Yep.
That's the main drive.
I think the wellness center has their sign out front on
Yep.
Bennett Drive and so on.
Yep.
I think we're good. Do they have to apply for a sign permit?
Well, we have to talk about construction signage. Lots of times at the lending institutions or the state of Maine might require a 4x8 project sign.
We will have a project construction sign, probably 4x8. That'll have the contractor, it'll have the architect, and it'll have the.
I believe you need it.
That meets code.
Right, oh,
The
But
council,
for the sign, I guess, like, were you asking about a sign that they're gonna
yeah,
erect?
the permanent sign,
Are they gonna need a sign permit
there's
for
a
that?
separate permit for that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that'll
Yes.
just fly right through code enforcement.
So we're good on T.
Design relationship to site and surrounding properties.
Well, seeing as it was situated there
It's
for
already,
access,
it's already a school,
yeah, I think it's perfect.
and it's already recreational land. And change the building configuration, but the original uses of all that land are actually being maintained rather nicely. My opinion. Now, scenic vistas and areas. Matt, this page V through Z might challenge you in terms of NAs.
Scenic vistas? Well, I mean, if the concern is almost none, then the provision is adequate.
All right.
So is that a yes, no, or?
I think you could do, I think a yes works
a
just
yes
as well
works.
as a not applicable.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
You same with utilities. Utilities are good. Well, the only utility left is electricity, and water and sewer is already covered.
We think that'd be part of infrastructure.
Yeah,
Redundant.
infrastructure is more like roads. It's moot anyway. We're not gonna argue about utilities.
Is that gonna be a yes or a
Well,
NA?
the only time NA would advantage you is if you're leaning towards no. If you're inclined to say yes anyway because it's not a real concern.
It's not a concern, so it's a yes. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're discussing mineral
Yeah,
exploration.
I understand.
Yeah.
Somebody can't drag you into
So
court and
in
say
the
it's not
fact
applicable.
finding, where we've said these things don't matter, we can just write, not of concern, rather than not applicable.
Well, we must eliminate-
Not a major concern, yeah.
So like if,
Anybody finds diamonds while they're digging, we don't want to know about it.
There may be a few people with metal detectors looking around for some 100-year-old coins while this is all being uprooted.
That's all right.
As long
Maybe
as
I'll
they
join
get
them.
contractor approval.
Maybe I'll join them, you never know. General requirements, which are on page 859 of the zoning laws. Do we have anything there we need to worry about?
I don't think so.
Nothing comes to mind.
Phosphorus export is also not a major concern. Anything further the members want to discuss or ask of the proponent? Hearing none.
Mr. Chair, I did
Yes.
have one thought just in mineral exploration. Is there any chance there would be some sort of artifacts on that site?
We're gonna find some horseshoes. Seriously,
It's a farm.
it was a horse track.
It's a horse track.
It was a horse track. Teague Park was a horse track.
Okay.
I have a picture of it at my place. As a horse track, as a horse track.
The contractor will certainly have to abide by any state requirements as far as notification.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've-
Any
If
artifacts
things are
or
going
something.
on.
I can only say I trust that those requirements are in the contract because the state has approval of this contract. Maybe that's a bad thing for a chairman to say, I trust. But
You trust the state.
I have a funny feeling that that's covered. Good point, Ken, very good. It's just like the diamonds. If somebody finds diamonds or good artifacts, I want a phone call.
I say we use, RSU uses that money for a bigger gym and a bigger music room. I mean, just keep it going. Something.
Well, I think, is that Collins Pond?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we need a motion?
We do.
Steve makes a motion that we accept the final plan review for the site design application for Eastern Aroostook RSU number 39. Second.
There has been a second by Mr. Evans. Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Personally speaking, though, I want to say, you did your homework and you made this job easy,
Yeah.
relatively.
That looks like about
This
the
was
right
a
location.
very good
Almost put Teague
site
Park on
design
that field.
What color?
package. What?
We're trying to find Teague Park on the painting on the back wall.
I don't know if it existed when that painting, well, maybe 1893,
I'm gonna say probably not.
probably not. If you follow it up from the old Fort Bridge, it's up in
Yeah,
there
except,
somewhere.
except the Fort Bridge on that map is, I believe, Water Street Bridge.
Correct,
Oh.
yeah. Yeah, the Fort Bridge is here now.
Yeah. But still, it looks to be like there's a church. Well, or maybe not. Is
I
that-
don't know, I have a funny feeling that's a rather stylized portrait.
I think there's some artistic liberties there. much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, you get to
You have a box.
Yes, I know.
You need a sign, so.
No, we thought,
Yes, I need your signature right there.
Yes, almost. I don't think there's anything.
Thank you.
I don't think there's
We still gotta get through new business and old business.
I know. Okay. Let's get some signatures on this. While that's circulating, is there any new business to come before us? Denise has been sheltering us.
Wow.
I thought you were talking.
The old business. Well, actually, I would be remiss under some kind of new or old business if I did not offer Phil
Right, exactly.
the board's sincere thanks for his service as chair over the past, 2-3 years?
I've lost track, I'm not counting.
Phil has lost track. Well, we do thank you for it.
You're very welcome. I will do my best to refrain from interrupting. Keep me in line.
Oh, don't you worry. We neglected to make the DEP approval a condition of approval, but I have a funny feeling that they don't get that, nothing happens anyway.
You're on the right way. You're close. You're close.
I'm close. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, sir.
Can we appoint you as the person who keeps me straight for the next year?
He's the secretary. That is his job.
We can put it right here with this one. We'll make sure Denise gets that as well.
Get your eyes on that, Denise.
I do. Great.
See you next at the open house.
Groundbreaking.
That's right. Yes, that's right. There has to be groundbreaking.
And naming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any new communications for us?
We have had no request for permits. However, we have been approached in conversation on one apartment application, possibly, which would involve rezoning. So it could be kind of a more complicated application. One conversation regarding a possible camping and RV park, and one conversation of a possible auto detailing business. Initially to be like a home business, and then moving out into the community. So, conversational only.
Okay. We had conversations a couple of years ago about an RV park, and it was going to wind up being contingent on the new zoning and the new zoning laws that we have yet to finally submit to City Council.
This actually might be a continuation of the same conversation.
Same one over on 4th Street, on the Fort Road?
Lombard. No, this would be Lombard Road, right?
Nope,
Caribou Cabins?
nope,
No?
no, I'm not aware of that one.
No.
Okay, no, it would be the other one.
I'm
It would
thinking
be-
of
It would be Fort Road. Yeah, you're
Farmer-
exactly correct. Yep.
Farmer Mark.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh,
Remember that one?
no, but I know where you're
One where
going.
he was afraid. We
Yes,
had rules
yes.
at the time that it said that everything had to be shielded,
Right,
and his whole point was they wanted to be able to have a view of the river.
sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're somewhat aware of that one. It's been a while. All right, now, Mr. Dennis. Oh, staff, you just gave us the staff.
Well, the staff report is a little different in that, basically, I'm behind the 8 ball. I'm doing my certification. I'm reading up on all the things I need to take tests on. I'll start with legal issues first. Hopefully schedule a test for next week. Then we'll move right on to zoning, land use, and then we'll knock them down in order after that.
We'll give you 2 weeks to get that done.
I appreciate it.
Is the learning materials very long?
Legal issues was 129 pages of MRSA, this and that. Generally pretty dry stuff.
Yeah.
But the tests are such that if you bring your material with you, it's open book.
Oh. Well, as it should be, because in real
It's
life...
open book in your office, yeah.
Exactly. In real life, you...
Basically, they're teaching you where to go look for this information.
Yep. Okay.
We're down to item 10, planning board training, and I know Dennis is raring to go.
I wanted to give you a little more background information. Let's see, that was taken this morning? No, I'm not sure.
Might have been.
Might have been. So what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of background information into, I think, some of the legal aspects of changing the zones that you've been working on. I don't know that it's going to shift things around a lot from what you've already been working on, but I just wanted to give you a little more historic context to land use regulation. And this, I say, is a gross understatement of facts and details as far as training goes, but I think I'll just give you some good base knowledge from which to work from. That still is hazy, isn't it? It's a little better. So land use regulation, basically the imposition of regulations affecting the use, benefit, and enjoyment of property in order to protect and foster the general health, safety, well-being, and vitality of designated communal interests. Be those what they may, whatever the community decides, this is what our priorities are, what we want to protect or enhance or whatever, that's usually the basis for creating land use regulations. And those can be, anything, as I said, from the health and safety. It goes a lot of different ways nowadays. A lot of communities doing different things. Ultimately, cities need to be relying upon a general plan with their land use regulations. You need to be into that document, being very familiar with it. If you haven't read it lately, I would encourage you to do so. But your general plan really is the rudder that helps steer the ship for all the land use regulations. And I got to looking how I was putting those words together. It started looking like a ship, so I use that metaphor. But basically, that's everything that you're doing needs to be pointed toward what are our long-term goals for this area. And not necessarily what are the current uses there and how do we make the zoning match the current uses, but how do we start to drive this the direction we want to go. One of the things that I tasked Ken with doing fairly shortly is to do a land use survey of the city, so we do have a better indication of what the current land uses are. So we do have more of a baseline of this is what we're working with. The zoning, you can rely on that to a degree, but it also helps if you're looking to see some things happening in the area, what is already there, how can we capitalize on that, or what do we need to work around. So that's one of the projects that I know Ken's going to be working on after he gets some things out of the way. But a lot of it stems back, this is one of the major landmark issues that occurred that started this idea of the need for regulation. When the fires broke out in 1666 in London, you had, those are pictures that an artist drew of buildings that remained after the London fire. They were torn down in the early 1800s, but he was able to go in as an artist and get a kind of a snapshot of the kind of building construction that you had in the area. Almost everything was made out of wood timber, Tudor design, very ornate moldings. The buildings, as you went up in stories, they would just cantilever out the next story. And some of the alleyways, you'd have buildings across the alley from each other that were closer than they were at the street level.
Do you know why they did that?
Go ahead.
So they could toss their sewage out from the upper floors without hitting the lower floors.
There you go. The need for public sewage systems, right? So there's, when they started rebuilding the city, this was a quote from history.com that I found. It was just a very simple synopsis of what happened. Basically, they said, we need to start having better construction standards. We need to have better separation between buildings. We need to have better ways of fire brigades getting in through the streets, of protecting the residents, and thus you get some of your first building codes as a result of this fire. And again, it comes back to this looking at, we need to make some things safer. In the late 1900s, you have the philosophical movements that start to creep out into American society and academia and architecture. You have the City Beautiful movement, and I'm not sure why that projector doesn't show everything. But it was coming through the industrial age where people were seeing gray, dark cities, living conditions weren't the best, and there was a kind of a reaching out for how do we improve the quality of life? How do we make things better for the living conditions? You started to see, again, in the Industrial Revolution, you see the smokestacks, the factories, and all those things that people were hoping to escape, but they couldn't because they had to make a living, and so their living conditions weren't the best. And in the City Beautiful movement, you have, it was the late 1800s, early 1900s, you have this philosophy that, you know what, maybe if we tear down some of the ugly and build back grandiose, people will have a better feeling about the place where they live. And so one of the main results was the National Mall, where you had plans for the big monuments, the big gardens, the more European-esque estates type of things, that if people can come and enjoy these plazas and this amazing statuary and these amazing buildings, they'll have a greater pride in their living arrangements, and they'll be happier because we've put all this money into these great things. There was another movement, the Garden City movement, that was headed up by Ebenezer Howard. He wrote a novel kind of spearheading this, and his philosophies were not so much tear down and build pretty, but it's more about the relationship of what you're building. And is there a way of creating synergy in places where you have a delivery of services in certain locations that are connected to other smaller cities, but you're still in close enough proximity to forests and farms that people feel like they're still connected to nature. And there's a way of growing that together. It's interesting when you look at the diagram on the right, which was his typical Garden City layout. He lists uses, let's see, insane asylum, a home for the inebriates, let's see, home for waste. Issues at the time that they were dealing with, but the thought being that you have major rail lines that come in to deliver services, you have major roads to get people in and out, you have a canal system that connects transportation between and waterways. Each of the cities has their own water supply, and you basically look at how can you build these centers. The central city right in the middle of that diagram, he was estimating would be about 12,000 acres in size and be a capacity for, what was it, 58,000 people on 12,000 acres. And the smaller circles, you'd be about 6,000 acres and 32,000 people living in them. So this isn't just a single city thing. This was his grandiose vision for if the whole countryside could be developed in a way, this could make things work. And Ebenezer Howard, I thought this was an interesting quote. He said, "By so laying out a garden city that, as it grows, the free gifts of nature, fresh air, sunlight, breathing room, and playing room shall be still retained in all needed abundance." Well, as the automobile came into play, you started to see some of this leapfrog type of development occurring. You saw cities having the connections, and you also started to see this growth pattern out. And not necessarily did you see all the same benefits that he was asking for, but people were certainly escaping the big cities because it was cheaper. It was easier to get somewhere. The freeway systems that were built in the United States kind of helped expand the city. And still the idea being, let's create better communities. Let's find a better way of creating quality of life. And again, coming back to how that builds up on land use regulations. This is just a breakdown of some major court cases that have occurred over the years that have kind of led up to where we are with our zoning regulations today. One of the first cases at the Supreme Court was Welch versus Swayze. A community in Massachusetts, they thought in a commercial area you could build a building 120 feet tall, but in a more residential area it should maybe only be 50 to 80 feet tall because the women and children would be more susceptible to fire hazards in residential areas, and they didn't want to have them have to come down through tall buildings to get the safety. And the developers, they didn't like having to be limited by a height regulation, and so it went to court, and the court said, no, there's a reasonable purpose behind the regulation, and so we're going to defer to the local government to take care of its own in a reasonable fashion, and we're going to uphold height regulations. And it wasn't, there were many other cities even before this that were implementing those, but it just happened to be that city was the one that was sued. In 1915, Hadachek versus Sebastian. This was an interesting one where the city of Los Angeles annexed an existing brick plant. And then after they annexed them, they said, we're kind of glad you're in the city, but we don't like your impacts, and so we're going to zone you out. You can't operate anymore. And the courts at the time, they upheld the city's reasoning for we don't want the negative impacts, and so we're going to close you down. The court upheld it. When I was taking my professional planning exam, I remembered that one because of the Hadachek. Well, I had a check before I got annexed. You know, it's the guy's name, but that's how I remembered that one. Again, the courts upheld it. They probably wouldn't uphold it today with the changes in the laws, but it stems from the early belief that cities, again, if they have reasonable purposes, they've got a basis of logic behind their regulations, then the cities should be able to regulate their own. New York was the first city to adopt a zoning ordinance in 1916. In 1926, this was where the village of Euclid, they had zoned some property such that they were afraid that industrial encroachment was going to impact the residential neighborhoods. And so they said, we want this area for residential, we want this area for industrial. And the developer didn't like that. and so he sued the city. The city basically said, this is the land uses we want, this is the type of not the type, but the square footage, the frontage requirements, the property sizes that we want. And the Village of Euclid, that court case alone basically set the stage for much of the zoning that's in place today across the nation. This idea of, we'll put these uses here, and they actually call it Euclidean zoning in academia because of that. Aside from the regulation of land uses, you then started getting into people saying that the zoning was more an infringement not upon their ability to use their property, but their freedoms of speech. You had Renton versus Playtime Theaters. It was an adult business that was basically zoned out of the area. They came in, they wanted to operate, and the city said, no, we're not going to allow an adult business in this commercial area, and they were sued. The city had a basis of argument. They had studies that showed the potential negative impacts from adult businesses on the community, the children, the adjacent property values, and the court basically said, you've got a logical framework again and studies to support your decision, and as such you would be able to regulate these even though it is someone's arguing an infringement upon their freedom of speech. The employees and the employer felt that they should have the ability to express themselves in any way they wanted in their own place of business. Even though it was adult, they should be able to do that as a freedom of speech.
Boston went through that sometime earlier than '86, probably in the late '60s, very early '70s. They said, okay, we can't ban it altogether, but we can sure as heck contain it. Mm-hmm. And they took one little piece of the theater district and said, okay, this is your playground. You're not going anyplace else. And they got away with it. Yeah. And eventually the businesses all died anyway, of their own natural death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's another element of that, is that even today, cities can't totally ban them from your city. You have to allow it a district or an area where they can have that freedom of expression, but you can certainly put in caveats or limiting factors that you can't be within so many feet of schools, or churches, other things like that. Okay. Then you get into the takings issues of when cities impose zoning, are they actually taking away a property right? And what kind of compensation is due to the property owners. In Lucas versus South Carolina, a gentleman purchased 2 pieces of property, beachfront property. When he purchased it, he could build a house on both pieces. And then the state adopted a regulation for shoreline zoning that effectively took away his ability to build on the lots. And so he sued that you took away my property, I should be compensated. The Supreme Court said, no, there is, again, a nexus between what they're trying to accomplish and what you're saying you want to do. There's a basis for it. Plus, the government has not taken your property from you. You still have beneficial use of that property. And that term comes up a lot, beneficial use. They can still go to the beach. They can still use their property for parties, for whatever, for camping. The property is not taken by the government. And so at that point, the court said, you're not due any compensation. So again, it's changing a little bit. In fact, in Dolan versus the city of Tigard, this was a court case out of Oregon. The city said, yes, we can see you want to redevelop your commercial property. We want you to expand. And by the way, we think that we want you to put a walking path in on one side of your property along a creek bed. And you go ahead and put that in and improve it with a pathway and then turn it over to the city in order for you to develop your property or expand your business. The city, they felt like there was a reasonable nexus between the request, and the developer or the owner of the business didn't think that was very reasonable. their expansion of their business had nothing to do with why the city was already, or coming in and saying they had to dedicate this pathway and build this pathway for the city. So it made it all the way through the lower courts in the city's favor and got to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, we're going to find in favor of the business owner. There needs to be a reasonable nexus between what the city's requiring, and this is where it comes into the development regulations that we might impose. For instance, the buffering or the screening standard that we have, that you were using tonight. There needs to be a basis for what is the reasonable standard for screening that we're going to have on the books. And it can't just be an arbitrary, you know what, that person behind there says that you're going to be looking in their backyard, and so we want you to put up a fence, plus a hedgerow, plus night light screening. You know, there needs to be a reasonable nexus between the requirement, and you can't just say we need you to provide a whole new house and a deck for that person. You wouldn't, I know, but
There's a city on the Penobscot, down on the east side of the Penobscot, below Bangor, that had just such an argument a few years ago.
okay.
The city wanted to have a pedestrian pathway through their property, and they fought it tooth and nail. I don't remember how that came out.
Well, the Corps basically said there has to be a connection between your requirement and the reasonable purposes of the city, and also it has to be relative to the impacts. So in the case of the walking path here, the court said, yes, we can see the reasonable nexus between what you're trying to accomplish and why you're requiring it, but the impacts that the business is bringing may only, they may only have 4 visitors walking down that path, and it's not reasonable to require them to put a full path in and improve it for 4 additional pedestrians in the area. And in that's where the city got their hands slapped. They said, if you're going to require that, even if it's reasonable, you can only require so much of the developer based on the impacts they're actually bringing. A lot of times you'll see this where a new development might be coming in, and the city will say, you're putting 10 houses in, and our street needs to be widened. And so in order to approve your 10 houses, we need you to widen that street between, for a quarter mile. Well, 10 houses maybe puts 100 trips on the road during the day. 100 trips on the road is very minimal as far as requiring additional widening of roads. And so somebody could say, my nexus or my impacts with this development don't warrant expanding the road. In those cases, then the city has to find or utilize other tools to generate the funding necessary to widen that in the future. You have recently, well, in 2000, the Religious Land Use and Institutional Persons Act. Some cities were saying that because you're a church, we're going to regulate you a little bit differently than other non-residential uses. And the court said you can't do that. You need to treat them the same as you would a non-residential use, an office building, a retail establishment. And so you're going to look at what's the anticipated traffic that they're going to bring, and what's the anticipated noise, what's the anticipated whatever, and you need to treat them fairly or similarly to commercial establishments. At the same time, the Religious Land Use Institutional Persons Act, RLUIPA for short, says that you also can't impose something that could reasonably impact their ability to worship. So, for instance, if a church wanted to illuminate the religious symbol at night, and it was part of their worship services to turn that on after each of their evening services, and that was a part of their worship, but the city has a light regulation that says no lights shining up into the night sky after a certain hour, then they could argue, well, that's an infringement upon our worship, and the city may have to, in a sense, waive that requirement for them as part of their religious services. So something to be mindful there. One of the most recent landmark cases was Kelo versus the City of New London. This was down in New York as well. What had happened here was a developer came in and said he was going to redevelop an area. And the city was all in favor with it, all on board with it. And it got down to the developer moving forward, and he finally said, I can't do it. But I'm just going to sit on my property as investment property. The city said, in its eyes, no, we want to see this redeveloped. We want to see this thing come to fruition. It's going to be a benefit to the city, to the community as a whole, for lots of reasons. And the city went in and used its condemnation or eminent domain abilities and acquired that property, and then turned around and sold it to another private developer that had the wherewithal and the funds to actually make the development happen.
I remember reading about that.
The original developer, he sued the city, saying you can't use police power, the condemnation powers of the city for public purposes. It can only be for public use. In the sense, if the city's going to use eminent domain, then it needs to be for something the city's actually going to use. And so it became this major court battle of, is there a difference between public purpose and public use? And it's been brought up before the court many times before that the court has relied on public purpose. And so there was really nothing new that came out of the court case other than to say, yes, cities can use condemnation abilities for economic development, and they could use it in this way so long as the purpose is being met. Now, that court case sent a grass fire across the nation of people saying that's a little too liberal. We don't think government should be using condemnation power for economic development. Let developers go in and do that. Let developers be the hands that do that. And so a lot of states amended their constitutions to not allow cities to do this, to use eminent domain for economic development purposes, unless there was provisions in there. Some states have it that if it's to remove blights or slums, then they could use eminent domain and see redevelopment occur. But some of them tightened up those regulations quite a bit. So again, as we look at the zoning, you have the Euclidean zoning, which looks at the land use, density, building location, sizes, densities of, or intensities of uses. Development regulations look at the subdivision design. There's planned unit or residential developments. I don't know if you guys understand or know those terms, have heard those terms before, some of you. So these may be some training opportunities for the future to go through maybe some of these individually and talk about them. Transferring of development rights is kind of a hybrid of the planned unit developments. Of course, we talked about open space requirements tonight. My concern with the way the regulations are right now, you're just saying, are they providing open space? Well, your yes or no tonight was pretty simple because yes, there's lots of open space there, but there really needs to be a percentage factor or some kind of set criteria in the ordinance that you're weighing that against. It shouldn't just be an arbitrary, yeah, that looks good. Okay? But the same thing with parking standards, landscaping standards. Cities are beginning to use architectural standards now for non-residential buildings and putting either on Main Street or off Main Street, depending on where they're at. Lighting standards, cultural and environmental preservation standards, and then we have our uniform or international building codes, MUBEC, international fire codes, property maintenance codes, and any federal requirements that get handed down to us, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Federal Fair Housing Act. All of those play into the regulations that get adopted or reviewed by you and sent up to the City Council. Another realm of zoning regulation that kind of bundles all of those things together. How many of you have seen this diagram before?
It was in the thing you sent to us, that YouTube video.
Uh-huh.
It looks familiar.
Yep. This.
Which I have forgotten to watch.
This is commonly referred to as a planning transect, and this was developed by Andrew Dwayne and his partners world-renowned architect and planning professional. And it's really been the impetus for what's called form-based zoning. You can see an element of Euclidean zoning in here, excuse me, in that you have zones. And the idea being here that your zones may not necessarily be so concerned about the land uses themselves, but the impacts that are being generated. So in a natural zone, you're not so concerned about necessarily the lot sizes or the acreage, is it farming, is it industrial, is it whatever. You're saying that in this natural zone, as long as it looks this way, smells this way, sounds this way, it can happen there. Okay? Very similar to what you've been discussing with the R3 zone, that almost becomes a natural zone or even a rural zone, where you say, you can do single family there, you can do packaging plants there, you can do agriculture there, and all these other things. And then the idea being that as you get into more of your urban area, that again, you're not so concerned about the land uses themselves, but as new development comes in, does it look the way we want it to look?
Sign criteria.
Does it, on Main Street, I was involved with 2 different cities in helping them develop their architectural standards for certain areas of their towns. And in one community they said, we lost all of the 2-story turn of the century buildings we had downtown. Any new development that comes in, we want it to look that way. And so we went through and we drafted standards to say, any new development, this is what your face has to look like. And we had to go through and modify the parking and the landscaping standards, made them completely different from the rest of the town, because that was the look the citizens said they wanted in that area, and so we had to adjust things. And it became more of this form-based zone of, if it looks this way and talks that way, we're good with it. Even though there may be more impacts or whatever, we're okay with it. And so there are many communities that are going to form-based codes completely. It's not a complete go away from Euclidean zoning. There's still some general uses, guidelines that you're going to have in place. But this is kind of the buzz in the planning realm, is going to these form-based codes, and really saying that you could have a single-family home in the urban center. You could have a convenience store in the natural zone. It doesn't have to be in a commercial zone. You can have really any kind of use in any area of the city, so long as the impacts are taken care of and it looks the way you want it to look. So anyways, that's kind of a more, there hasn't been a lot of discussion in the courts yet about form-based zoning. Again, most of it would fall back on these are the purposes we're trying to accomplish, the goals, and why we're doing the things we are. For the most part, it stays in line with the legal history of codes. But so that's the training that I have for you tonight. Again, it's just a kind of a history of from where we've been and where we are. Some things to think about. And if you've got, I don't know if you have any questions.
Could you email that to us?
Yeah.
I don't want to belabor this, but I'm just curious where deed restrictions fall into play, where you may have, you have your zoning which creates allowed uses, and then somebody sells a piece of property and they put a deed restriction in there which further restricts the use of that property.
Exactly.
To be more conservative than what the zoning allowed. Has there ever been any conflict between deed restrictions and zoning, and
Sure.
and has the development of zoning addressed that issue, or they've just been opposite sides of a coin and the two never get along?
Not necessarily. You'll have private developers that come in and they have a vision for this development that they want to create, right? We want all the homes to look a certain way, or the front yards to look a certain way, and they may put those protective covenants or deed restrictions in their development, and the city may not care. The city may, or I shouldn't say not care, but the city's regulations may be silent. They don't have anything on the books to regulate those things. In those cases, then, the purchasers of property in the development, they're buying those properties on notice. In a sense, they're buying into those covenants.
They're accepting it by the virtue of the
By
actual,
signing the deed, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
by doing the transaction.
Right. And so by purchasing the property and supposedly being fully aware of what they're buying, they're entering into those covenants and would be bound by them, so long as they are enforced privately. Because it is a private covenant deed restriction that has to be enforced privately between private property owners. I've worked with some developers where they will impose, well, I should say, the city would enter into an agreement with the developer before he develops. And the agreement would simply state, not simply, it's actually a document that's about that big that I've worked with, but the city would say, we're expecting you to develop this in accordance with your vision, and we're anticipating you're going to put deed restrictions in place according to your vision, and as a party to this agreement, you're agreeing to do all these things you say you're going to do. And after the development started going in, the city, even though it's a private development agreement and deed restriction, the city was still a partner or interested party in seeing that those things were enforced because of this separate agreement we have with the developer. And in those cases, the developer said, will you please not issue a building permit until I sign off on the architectural standards? In which case the city said, well, sure, we're an interested party and we hold the card for a building permit. We'll work with you on that and we'll do that. But when there's disputes about should it be a yellow house or a brown house, the city's just said, you go talk to your architectural committee. We don't care about that. But so,
You can run into that with deed restrictions, stuff like that, with multiple families under one dwelling. You know, like typical single-family house, you could run into that when there's 3 families, let's say, living under a roof. That there's a deed restriction there. There, you know, in that particular covenant, there you may only be allowed up to 2. You know, so there's those other subtle, I guess is probably the way to word it, things that not a lot of people are paying attention to.
yeah, whatever. And that gets into the Federal Fair Housing Act, which if the city starts to step in housing issues like that, you've really got to have a good basis for why you're stepping in and affecting somebody's housing situation. And even on the private side, if somebody starts to impose some of those things, they could be sued based on some regulations in the Federal Fair Housing Act. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Although it's really interesting in just starting legal issues. I'm just starting my first certification. But in the very first part of the legal issues, that there's a discussion about what gives communities or governments the right to regulate land use. And it goes all the way back to the Constitution of the United States, because it not only allows you the right to pursue happiness, it also allows us the right to provide general well-being to the public. So I thought that was an interesting take on that.
And the key word is the right to pursue happiness. You're not guaranteed to achieve it.
Very true. So again, if there's anything specifically mentioned tonight that you want more training on, I can take that now and prepare those for other meetings.
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is on that checklist, you know, you spoke about the clear areas or the open spaces. Okay, does Caribou have a percentage? I know that there's limits on permeable or non-permeable surfaces, etc. But you know, do we even have any percentage guidelines in our own documents, our own ordinances, to define how much open space is enough?
Well, keep in mind there's a difference between open space needed for storm drainage requirements and open space
Right, well, I
desired
just,
for residential recreation use.
right.
Or open space preservation.
So there's a variety of different open space. So open space isn't just open space.
No, we've
Different
got to,
kinds.
we probably should, before we stamp this thing we've been working on for 2 or 3 years, we should probably go back and see how open space requirements are dealt with. Because we may, it would be nice if somebody came in and wanted to develop and had a need to develop a subdivision. And they wanted to, for instance, what if they wanted to do it in what used to be called cluster zoning, where the houses and or townhouses are really close together, but the rest of the acreage is developed for recreation. There's got to be some rules about that if we're going to allow that to happen. Got to be some standards. So we may need to go back and relook at that, the subdivision part of our proposed zoning law, and make sure that's covered.
Are we still gonna meet at the end of the month, usually, to
Well,
start
that's-
hammering this out?
That's what I was gonna just suggest. I mean, do we wanna schedule another day this month, or do we wanna take an hour at our next meeting pending no new business and work away at that, which we haven't really addressed anything, I think, for the past 2 months.
I think that this time of year is probably slow. And so we could, the majority of our next scheduled meetings, next 2 meetings could be education or working on, you're referring about going back to chapter 13?
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, because that needs to get finished up.
We have to give Ken a little time.
I was gonna say, Ken needs some time to get, I mean, I spoke with Ken about the fact that we've been through chapter 13, with several different individuals, and some changes get lost, etc. We need to give him time to get firmly planted on the ground, and then he can work with us to go through
Our
this.
next meeting's on February 8th, that's 2 weeks. And then if we give Ken, give him another, week, or, we could do it on the 22nd of
I think he's
February.
got,
I signed up for a job, so don't worry about
Yeah.
me, I'm gonna be here to do the job.
right, but aren't you, these certifications, aren't they gonna take your time for several months?
Well,
Not weeks?
I think there's 7 tests that I can take. The first one that I need to take right now is the legal issues one. That starts the ball rolling. The rest can be done online.
Right.
So online means to me I can do it from my house or from here. So I'm, like I said, you guys schedule your meetings. I signed up for a job. I'll be
Yeah,
here.
Dennis, you've been where he is, except probably a long time ago. How much time does he need before we start burdening him? Or burden away?
I'm scheduled for retirement in 8 years.
Yeah, that's,
Well, I retired 10 years ago, and guess what?
I think the complete rewriting of chapter 13, we may want to just break that out into separate pieces, and if you want to start changing things, you can maybe take a section at a time and even forward it onto the council that way. If you wait to do the whole thing at once with everything that's been talked about.
Well, a lot of work has been done.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we're closer to the end
I'm
than
not
we
prepared
are
to scrap it and start over.
No, I think
No,
we're
that's
closer
not
to
what I'm
the, yeah.
saying.
But I think we're closer to a culmination of having it all done than we were, 6-8 months ago. Just, it's just, we've got some of those intricacies with regards to zoning, I think that we really need to make sure that we have nailed down before, we send it up the ladder.
Right, but going back to this open space, okay? I mean, should we review what we've got, and I don't want to, more educated, with more education simultaneous? Because what we've approved,
We haven't approved anything.
well, what we've done has been based on just common sense, not necessarily percentages or guidelines or historical understanding of things. I mean, what is your recommendation to us in how we?
Well, like I said, you have your development standards is one thing, and you have your zones and your land use table, which is another.
Right.
And I know that we've gone through the land use table, ones I've been through, ones I've had discussions happen since that part of things. development standards. That's gonna take some more review.
There's got to be another community about the same size as Caribou, same rural character, same economic bounciness, that's in a way more litigious area of the country, that would have rules that have been litigated so frequently that they would have criteria already set up for each one of those that we could steal and then build off of it, really. So we're not sitting here guessing what, how to evaluate open space,
Right,
phosphorus.
I would, no way I would want off the top of my head say, okay, it has to be
12%.
0.33%, blah, blah, blah. No way.
Yeah.
We've got to look at some examples. You're right.
I don't know where that would be, but
They used to use the town of Brewer as a comparable for Caribou. And I know Brewer and the people at the town office have been very, very active in their land use and in their code. So maybe it's out there.
Maybe we should plan for our next meeting just to look at where we're at with regards to Chapter 13 and see if we want to dissect it and send up a section at a time, like Dennis had said. But focus on the primary sections that are going to provide, I guess, the most meat for us to be able to work with and get those taken care of first.
It would help if you could find out from the city council if they're amenable to piecemeal, section by section submissions, or they want the whole package.
I don't know that they would carry either way.
I almost got to recap the whole thing before you submit it, because we learned a lot over 8 months. Probably the quality of our work is a lot better now than it was
8 months ago.
And if we can clarify more now, so it is more
Yeah,
ready.
so why don't we take an hour next meeting to, everybody bring their copy as it exists, and I think everybody's copy is a little different from everybody else's, based on what we've penciled in and we haven't. And
I mean, that might be step one, because I've mentioned to, about the fact that we made changes, and some got in and some didn't. And I don't know what the city has, Denise, what you have as the most recent official copy, not approved by the city, but the
Official
council.
draft.
Right.
I don't believe I've completed it, but I have it.
Because what I
With all
have
your
in this
changes.
binder may be very different than what others
that's
have.
what I was saying.
You'd have to give me some time to
Yeah.
do that.
Well,
just to make sure that everything's updated exactly the way you want it.
The next meeting is in 3 weeks, not 2.
Yeah,
February the 8th. Just 3 weeks.
I'll see what I can do. I'll have 2 sets of minutes to do as well, but
Okay.
that's okay. I'll see what I can do. I'll let you know. If it's impossible,
Yeah.
I'll say no.
Okay.
But I'll take a look. It's been a long time since.
All right, then I'll
I've
just
done
say
that.
that at the next meeting on the agenda, we will begin a rehash or a re-review.
So a comprehensive review of Chapter 13?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just work that out in a half an hour.
So, I know you'll be able to pull it up and you look at the raw Chapter 13, and you'll have a bunch of changes, but we need to make sure that you and I are both looking at what
Everything,
they've seen.
right.
Because I don't
Well,
think
yeah,
I've even
exactly.
seen what you've put together. So
And that's why I'm looking at Denise, because I'm hoping,
We now
I
have
it on
two
my
people,
floor. Yeah.
professionals on staff in management roles that are in a much better position to give us some guidance than we've had in the past. And this might be good going forward. Look forward to working with you both, and with my lady Denise over there.
I don't think Brewer's a good comparison anymore.
I used to use it for population needs.
I've never been to Brewer, except to drive through it to get to the
Brewer
skyline.
is significant.
Exploded.
I mean,
Yeah.
Brewer is like, they're huge, and the other thing which, as far as our economic situation, I'd look to Prescott before I'd look to Brewer, because they're in a comparable.
Maybe like a Western Mountain, a Western Maine type town. They'd be a little better off because of the skiing, but basically the same natural resources.
what was that
Small.
community that I was telling you about had the snow
And they
meteor?
fight like hell, so they'll taken these issues to court before. And
I don't know how big
Oh,
it sounds like
Rangeley?
Norway and
I
Oxford.
think
I
it
thought I was just gonna suggest perhaps Rangeley.
Rangeley's about 500 people.
But as far as natural resources.
Well, I like
There's a lot of, there's some resources we can tap into even with the American Planning Association. And they've got lots of publications on different things for, as far as reading material if you want it.
I know we probably all feel like we'd like to finish chapter 13 and go home, but we're not in a good position to rush it through at this point, even though we've done a lot of work. It's almost like it's time to take a fresh look.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we see more and more every time we go back and hash at something. Okay, well, we could work on
Yeah.
this in order to make this better. So I mean, it's all gonna be tied together. It's just a matter of,
Well, if Denise can assemble what she's got, and if any of us have anything different, then we can spend some time discussing that, just in case yours isn't the latest.
The very last workshop that I came to, that you worked on the actual content, you know,
Yep.
the language, Bob I recorded it, and I took notes, and then Bob gave me what he had for notes. So that's what I was working on, is updating. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that was
that'll
the
be
last
the
time we
final.
actually workshopped the wording. After that, all
Yeah.
we've done is look at maps.
It's
Right.
been
And
the
land
zoning
use
map
tables.
and the land use
So-
table.
Right.
So, yeah,
So
I do have
The revised status
Yeah.
as of that last verbal workshop that we had
Yes.
would be where to start.
When
It's been a
you-
while ago.
Whether it's before next meeting or after next meeting, after you got what is deemed to be the most current draft, can you email it to us?
Yes, I
Yeah,
can.
please don't print it out
Okay,
yet.
Right.
Yeah, email it to us.
okay.
Meeting is adjourned. My thanks to everyone.